I've spent the past several weeks recreating a Victorian-era dress for my great-great-grandmother Carolina, an immigrant girl living in the Lower East Side in the 1880s. Now, I've brought that dress to New York City to retrace her steps. I can walk in her shoes, literally. I can visit the site where she got off the ship, the park where she brought her children, even her old address. And it's a construction site. Welcome to the 6th and final episode of The Clothes on Their Backs. My name is V. I'm a dress historian who uses fashion to understand the real world of the past. And to get to know my ancestor Carolina's world, I spent 3 days exploring New York City while wearing what could have been her best dress, visiting the places that would have made up this immigrant girl's new world. We are at Castle Clinton, which would have been the main immigration site in New York City in 1880 when my great-great-grandmother came here. This would have been where she took her first steps in America. Ellis Island, not operating until the 1890s, didn't exist yet. The Statue of Liberty, not there, didn't exist. Emma Lazarus' poem hadn't even been written yet. So it was here that immigrants like my great-great-grandmother were coming through. I don't actually know if they had the cannons still mounted in 1880, those massive things that they have one of inside. I'm just wondering how she would have felt. You get off this 2-3 week trip, probably in steerage, and this is what you see, this big imposing stone building with guns. Not necessarily the most welcoming sight. This right here is the first address we have for Carolina in New York City. But it's not until 9 years after she immigrated. This address, 167 2nd Street, is where she lived with her first husband, who she married 9 years after immigrating. This building is new. It's not this building. Still a few older buildings in the neighborhood, I think. I don't know enough about architecture to say whether they would have been here when she lived here. But this is the neighborhood where she lived. This is where she had her first daughter, Millie, not the daughter I'm descended from, but her first daughter. This was her neighborhood. This was her home. So I spent 3 days in this dress filming around New York, with a clean chemise and drawers underneath every day. Don't worry. But I had a lot of things to do on this New York trip that wouldn't go as well in 19th century clothes, from scoping out locations to attending a conference. So I want to thank thredup for sponsoring this video and basically dressing me for the rest of the trip. thredup is an online thrift and consignment store that makes shopping secondhand easy and accessible, especially for people like me who don't own cars or find getting out and about difficult. Nearly everything I wore on this trip that wasn't great-great-grandma Carolina's dress came from thredup. Like this outfit I threw together for a morning walk through Central Park. I love being able to get outside and just enjoy the sunshine once the weather warms up. The jumpsuit is super lightweight and means fewer pieces to match, all the good parts of wearing a dress and of wearing pants. The sweater I paired it with has these really cool points at the hem. They add a lot of interest without being loud. It's perfect for those days where you don't really need a jacket, but you also don't really not need a jacket. And I think it'll go with just about everything I own. I love 1950s style pieces for summer, so I was super happy to have this adorable dress to wear to Shabbat services that week, even if it was raining. It's so cute and was only $19.95 instead of $51 estimated retail. Given the rain, I wanted something a little warmer, so for dinner with my writers fellowship, I got this gray sweater dress. It's a cotton rayon blend, so it's cozy but still breathable, and fancy enough for going to nice restaurants with people who are much cooler than me. And I had the comfiest and most stylish outfit I've ever traveled in for the plane ride home. To go with trousers I already had and shoes I brought back from my India trip last year, I got this amazing silk camisole in one of my favorite colors. It's the perfect base layer for under this cashmere sweater. Yes, I said cashmere, and good quality cashmere at that, for $23.40 instead of $267 estimated retail. I cannot describe how soft this is. It's coming on every plane trip I take from now on. If you want a closer look at these pieces or to find something similar for yourself, click my link in the description and use my code SNAPPY for an extra 40% off your first order. So this is where my great-great-grandma Carolina lived with her second husband, my great-great-grandfather, in the year 1900. We have it on the census records that this was their address. one of those where the address isn't actually there anymore. It's 116. We can't find a 116. But if you look at the building looks pretty old. I don't know that much about architecture, but maybe somebody could tell me if this looks old enough to have been here since 1900 and they've just changed the numbering, or if this is a newer building. By the 1910 census, she and her second husband, my great-great-grandfather, her daughter that I'm descended from, and all of their stepchildren had moved to Brooklyn because the Lower East Side was just getting too crowded and too overpopulated, and they were able to move out.
Having exhausted what I could learn from census records, I turned to the local history experts at the Lower East Side Jewish Conservancy. Bradley Shaw grew up in the neighborhood and brought us on an incredible tour of places in the Lower East Side connected to Carolina's life.
This synagogue that we're in now was not a synagogue that my great-great-grandmother ever would have gone to, right?
This is the people of Bialystok, Poland. Founded this sometime somewhere on Hester Street in the 1800s. But in 1905, they bought this Methodist church and turned it into a synagogue. The ark, which is supposed to be on the eastern wall, is on the western wall. Get a special dispensation from the rabbi.
But you know of a few other synagogues that Carolina might have actually gone to?
Yes. Her first husband was of German descent. A lot of people of German descent, especially the ones who moved here before 1880, were Reformed.
Mm-hmm.
And the first Reform synagogue here on the Lower East Side was Ancestor, and that's on Norfolk Street, and that is currently the Angel Orange Sand Center, and it's the oldest extant synagogue in New York City. Her second husband, Lustig,
Yes.
Lustig, he was also Hungarian.
Mm-hmm.
Probably were looking for a Hungarian synagogue,
Mm-hmm.
and there was one at 60 Columbia Street, which was basically right around the corner from where they were living.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that was a pretty big congregation. She was about 18 or 19 when
18, 19.
her brother was 15.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, they're not going to move. They're not going to come here to the United States unless they know somebody. So that's your link. That's your missing link.
Like that gap. We've got the ship record in 1880, then nothing. 1889, marriage record.
Right.
1890, has her first daughter.
Right.
That's it.
She's having her first child at like 27.
28. Yeah, she gets married late.
Yeah, it's like...
She's my age now.
It is. It's three, it's the kingdom of kings, actually King David. The next one is the kingdom of the Kohanim. Third one is the kingdom of Torah, and that should be on time. And you'll see this in most of the older synagogues. The Torah will be blue. These are Orthodox Jews. The German Jews who came in the 1840s and 1850s were Reform Jews for the most part. But the ones who were coming from the Pale of Settlement were always Orthodox Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Orthodox Jews, men and women, have to sit apart. Big places like this, they would have a separate balcony for the women. There are actually even curtains on the side because they're supposed to close the curtains so the men can't get a glance upstairs of woman and then not think about praying. In some of the smaller synagogues, in fact, almost most of them, they had a curtain called a mechitza. When I was bar mitzvahed, I actually put on a prayer shawl right after my bar mitzvah.
Mm.
But the common thing to do, and also it was very European, was to not wear it until you were married. They wanted to show the women that they weren't married. So the women would be up in the balcony, and it would be like a dating app. And you would look in this row here, and you would say, let's see, who doesn't have a tallis on? Said, oh, I don't like him, and you swipe left and you go to this row. And from this row over here, you would say, oh, I like the way he looks. And you'd ask somebody, who's that? They said, well, that's Mr. Bernstein. He's going to be a doctor. I said, good, I want to meet him. I've said that a number of times. Some people got offended by it. And they say, no. The reason is that when you're not married, the weight of the world is not on your shoulders. After you're married, all of a sudden you got to worry about the kids, you got to worry about your wife, you got to worry about making a living. So you have much more to worry about. So what you do is you wear the prayer shawl, and that when you start to think about anything else, you pull it over your head. and you pray like that to concentrate more.
We see a lot in fashion history. People will use clothing like that as a way just to tell the world about them at a glance.
That's right.
But what's interesting is in many more cultures, you see the men never dress. They don't change their dress when they get married. The women do, whether it's covering their hair, whether it's something else, whatever that is. In these communities, it went both ways. You can tell, regardless of gender, if somebody's married by glancing at them.
It's the same reason why Orthodox Jews are buried in plain pine boxes. There is no hint of social status. If you're wearing a tallis, it doesn't matter whether you're wearing rags or a silk suit, you look the same. We're in front of the Henry Street Settlement. A settlement house is where people came from another country to basically get settled, to learn English, to learn your way around the subways, to find a place to work. Probably the most famous settlement house was the Henry Street Settlement. It started with Lillian Wald. Lillian Wald was a German Jew who came from the Midwest. So she came here and found a settlement house that basically would help people that needed medical needs. These nurses go from door to door to see what these people needed, and she would help them out. After the nurses' settlement, it became a regular settlement house, and it is still operating today.
Is that her?
Not her. This is one of our nurses.
And based on what she's wearing, that's taken between 1908 and 1914.
1914.
If you look at these old photographs, and I can tell, like, okay, based on the person's budget and then what they're wearing, skirt high up on her waist, not very big around the bottom. That tells me it's after 1908 because that's when the high waist and the narrow skirt became fashionable. Before 1915, because that's when the First World War would have changed women's fashions a lot to make it easier to move around. And so that's when the skirts got shorter, bigger around, the waist dropped a little bit.
What this picture is actually showing is one of Lillian Wald's nurses. Instead of coming to an apartment and then going all the way downstairs and going to the next house and then having to walk all the way upstairs, she would just climb over on the roof. These people are coming from shtetls in Eastern Europe. They're not educated. They don't speak English. These German Jews had actually an ulterior motive. They were actually embarrassed of these Jews, and they were afraid that people would look down on them. So they had to build these settlement houses to assimilate them as much as possible, so all the Jewish people would not get a bad name. Seward Park was built in 1903 because most of the kids in this neighborhood were playing in the streets. In 1903, they had a grand opening, and they had about 200 seats set up in the park. Dignitaries coming, the mayor and the governor and a few other people. But everybody from the neighborhood knew that this park was opening, and there were 10,000 kids on the outside, were lined up on East Broadway to wait to get in. The grand opening was scheduled about 1 o'clock. At 12 o'clock, they rushed the gates. The truth is, who was this for? This was for the kids. This was a playground. This is probably where everybody came. Your great-grandmother would definitely come here. This was one of the places that people would congregate.
This opens in 1903, right?
1903.
So Carolina's bringing her younger stepchildren, her daughter by her first husband, and then in 1904, after my great-grandmother, her daughter with her second husband is born, she's probably bringing all those children here.
This is also a place to meet everybody, because all of your friends are bringing their kids here too. So while the kids play, you can sit here and chat. So this was the perfect place.
Yeah, and it's beautiful.
It is still very, very beautiful. My grandparents always told me, go down to the corner and get a Fovitz, Jewish Daily Forward. And this is the Jewish Daily Forward it was built in 1912. The editor-in-chief was Abraham Kahan. This was a bastion of socialist thinking. It was the most popular Yiddish newspaper. In 1911 was the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. It was here that they let the labor movement flourish. And as somebody said, #1 anarchist, Emma Goldman used to speak in this square.
Shortly before the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, there was a massive, massive strike of specifically women garment workers who were upset at how they were being treated. They were also upset at not having access to the unions that the men had access to. And a lot of the leaders of that movement were very young Jewish women. So Carolina herself, she's in her 40s. She's got a house to run. What her oldest daughter might have been part of this. She would have been 18, 19.
Yes.
Around the time of the uprising of the 20,000, this massive women's garment worker strike. And that probably had some connections here too, that massive strike.
Yes, this is socialism to help people. And the labor movement was to get them the pay that they deserved and get them to really earn a living.
The stuff that still matters in terms of garment production today, it's just that instead of it being here and it's the immigrants to America that are being made to work in these conditions, not paid very well for their time, all of that, it's people in other countries off where we don't have to see about it and don't have to think about it if we would prefer to be ignorant. We know the name of the Landsmannschaft she and her second husband were buried under.
That's right. And basically they would have a synagogue there. They would have, again, you would meet people from your own place, wherever it was. And also what they did is they had death benefits, which is very important.
I've read about this. I don't think their plots are right next to each other, but it's the same Landsmannschaft, even though
It's probably in the same area. It's in the same area because they buy a whole big plot of land.
Yeah.
And that's what they would do. And this way, if you go here and you pay some dues, then you can go and you have a place to be buried.
From what I read, it would help with the expenses somewhat. Sometimes if someone got ill and couldn't work,
Yes.
if someone died, and then suddenly not only have you lost their income, you have the funeral expenses, you have burial expenses, you have all of that. And so it's almost like an early form of life insurance.
It's an early form of life insurance. It's a good way of putting it. Whenever you see Jewish stars in a frieze of the building, it was built by the Herder brothers, same ones who built the museum at Eldridge Street. That is their mark. They wanted to attract people. If you were a Jewish immigrant that was coming here and you were looking for a place to live in a tenement, well, you would be attracted to some place with Jewish stars.
Of course you go there.
Right. Every one of their tenements had that as a frieze. There are still 3 or 4 left. But the Herder brothers were not Jewish. They were German Christian architects. Tenements at first were really, really nasty places to live. It was one room out here, 2 rooms, possibly 3 rooms. Your bathroom was in the hall, but the only place that had a window was this room. Your ancestor happened to be somebody who worked in a sweatshop. These were the sweatshops. A lot of these sweatshops were in tenement buildings where they would have to work in this outside building because that was the outside room, because that was the one with the most light.
In terms of the industry at that time, people would become contractors for the big factories. You would take work home from them. You would set up your own little sweatshop in the tenement. Or you would have people, and this is something she might have done, she might have taken in piecework, which is like you take from the factory and you baste the pieces together, basically like pinning, but with thread, and then you give them back to the factory. And that's where you're working.
Board of Health and the building department says, people shouldn't live like that. If there is a room, you have to have a window. Originally, what they did is they put windows between the rooms. They weren't outside. A few years later, they said, no, that's not what we mean.
Yeah.
We mean it has to be a window to the outside. So what they did is they converted these to things called dumbbell tenements. They cut like a shaft in the middle of the building to have these windows to go outside to the shaft. If you lived on the upper floors, it was okay, but if you lived on the lower floors, well, this was a shaft that really didn't have access. So what would people do? They would throw garbage and other stuff into the shaft, and it smelled horrible. Let's say somebody took a cigarette and threw it out the window.
If it's not stamped out well, there's a major fire.
A major fire because there isn't much air for it, where would it go? Up.
Landlords. Same nonsense, different century.
That's right.
But I wanted to know more about where the garment industry, once the lifeblood of the Lower East Side, has gone in the century and a half since Carolina worked there.
Well, I'm going to start with the history of the garment industry and how important it is to New York City.
Tour guide Mike Kaback worked much of his life in that industry, so who better to show us around the garment district?
This guy reminds me of my father. Son of an immigrant, my grandfather, his father, came to New York on the Lower East Side, and he had a push cart full of skins. He's working on an electric sewing machine, works by a treadle, and he's a Jewish guy with a yarmulke. And on the flag of the city of New York is the seal put for it. Here it shows you a Native American Lenape Indian. He's living here. And here it shows you a sailor, a windmill, which the Dutch brought over to the New World. They are trading flowers, barrels full of flour for skins. Now, skins are very important in Europe, and they kill all the beaver. If you have a hat made out of beaver skin, people looking, and they know that you are successful. So when Henry Hudson, the sailor, gets back to Europe with news that these guys are willing to trade for flour, which is $10 a dozen, for this very valuable beaver skin, and so you could say that the island of Manhattan was first established because of fashion. Where you're standing right here in this diamond shape right here, there used to be the Fashion Walk of Fame. There were 28 plaques that was right here. Next one over there was Ralph Lifshitz. You heard of him? And he changed his name from Lifshitz to
Lauren.
So Ralph Lauren was the next one over. And he's known for his cowboy look of the Old West. And by that, I ruffle. Shirt and ruffle, just like what you're wearing. And we're going to leave here the corner of Fashion Avenue, Button, and the garment worker statue. We're going to walk east 1 block to Broadway. The difference between 7th Avenue and Broadway is 7th Avenue catered to the Neiman Marcus, Lord & Taylor upscale stores versus Broadway that catered to the Costco's and the Woolworths and the Kmarts, and these names don't exist anymore, but you get the idea.
The owners of this building keep an exhibit of photos from the neighborhood's past in their lobby, which they relied on Mike to help choose.
Push carts on the street could have been my father, my grandfather. The apartments, those dumbbell apartments contain a lot of people took work into their dumbbell apartments. And when they took work into their dumbbell apartments, there was no regulation. Here you see an ironing component to the sewing factory. No factory that makes finished garments would send a garment out unless it looked nice. And it won't look nice unless you iron it. ILGWU, International Ladies Garment Workers Union, top 1 million people right after the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. The bosses hated it. The union members loved because they could get better treatment in the factories. Here we are in front of 1407. You don't have to say Broadway. In New York, if you're a garment guy, 1407 means 1407 Broadway. So we could look at the empty spaces in all of these buildings. Why? The answer is simple. The answer is technology. If you're a buyer in San Diego, California, and you want to come to New York 25 years ago to see the lines in 25 different showrooms, you got on an airplane, you spent $600 to all of these showrooms, you missed a week of work. Today, you want to see the line? You call up, send me the line. 8 seconds later, on your big screen computer, you see the shorts and the longs and the greens and the pleated and the reds and they pressed, and you don't have to leave your office. Do you need a showroom?
Not so
That's
much.
why they're empty.
Yeah, you just need someplace you can take the photos.
There you go.
But the highlight of our day was visiting a factory many costumers will know, M&S Schmalberg, makers of beautiful fabric flowers. Warren Brand, one of the family of owners, was kind enough to tell me about the factory's Jewish roots and history.
What I'm really interested in is how this business got started. So you said it's 4 generations?
Yeah. So my father, Harold Brand, B-R-A-N-D, his mother was Schmalberg. And she had 2 brothers, Morris and Sam Schmalberg. And my father was born in Poland. We were Jewish. He lived in a small town in Poland, and suddenly the world changed. And Hitler came in, and Nazis came in, and my father lost everybody. One day he woke up in the morning. This is what was told to me, and I know it for a fact, that he was tapped on the shoulder by an American soldier who said, here's some water, it's over. So this man said, who can I contact? Who's left? My father said, I don't have anybody. But in New York, America, Schmalberg Flowers, because they left prior to the war and came to America and came to a business that at the time, was a hustle bustle industry. In those days, there was a zipper man next to us and a button man and a thread shop and sewing machines. And the streets were loaded with trucks of push carts. And we were one of, in my time, 10 flower shops in the 60s.
And now it's just
now
you.
It's really just us. It's period, just us in America.
It's all moved overseas.
Right. Come back to my father being that survivor. We're a survivor. Schmalberg is this.
Yeah. And if this is like these trades, the garment industry, the flowers, the sewing, the garment making, this is, I think, what the Jewish community ended up basically establishing ourselves on. For my family, what success ended up meaning was not having to do that kind of work anymore. It's a little bit disappointing because my parents, probably a little bit younger than you, they ended up really looking down on this kind of work. They wanted to be academics, they wanted to be scientists, they wanted to be engineers because their ancestors came here and did this work and set them up for a different kind of success. It means a lot to be able to come to a place like this that didn't want to leave this sort of work behind.
We were always the flower guy. We were the little guy with the flower guy. And even Adam, growing up, he's like, my dad just a flower guy, But Adam is so proud to be part of this now, and he aspires that maybe his daughter, he has 2 daughters, maybe them or one of his nephews, my other children's kids will come in because it's awesome. Part of why we're here.
Keep it going because that history matters to you.
Yeah, there's times, and even 2 years ago, where we weren't sure how we were gonna pay the rent.
Go get pretty flowers from their website, by the way. I brought home tons.
My great-great-grandmother who I'm dressed as, maybe you can help me pick something to put on her hat. She's 18, 19 years old. She comes to the US in 1880. Now it's spring of 1881. If she saves up a little bit of money to get something nice for her hat, what do you think she's going to be able to get?
In those days, something simple. Not a rose, because roses with a bud are more delicate to make and harder. Made in a cotton. Come over here, maybe we'll find something over here. But I'm looking for something that said neutral. Like this is a carnation. This is definitely a good way to go.
This is very pretty. I like that it goes with the dress. It's got that same sort of muted green.
Out of a cotton piqué.
I think I like this one.
Good
and
choice.
I think she would too.
All right, like this.
Voila.
What do you think?
Beautiful. You're right. Good pick.
It was an incredible experience to follow in my ancestors' footsteps and walk in her shoes, to build a connection with my heritage through the craft I love, to honor my ordinary, working class, displaced, and marginalized forebears who don't make it into period dramas, and the work they did so I could be here. But my story is just one story. We should be hearing about the Sephardic Jews that have been in this country for hundreds of years before my ancestors. We should be hearing about the Mizrahi Jews, all the people Carolina might have crossed paths with, immigrants hailing from everywhere from Ireland to China, formerly enslaved people and their descendants, the indigenous nations this land was stolen from. Those stories are not mine to tell, but they need to be told. So now, it's your turn. Share the history woven into your ancestors' clothes with the hashtag #ThreadsOfOurAncestors so we can all see it. And tell us in the comments what you'd want to learn from meeting your great-great-grandparents. Check out the description for a link to my Patreon where you can see the extended cut of this video. It's like twice as long. And if you want to check out thredup, use my link and code SNAPPY for an extra 40% off your first order.
I'll call Carolina gets a pickle.
There's a history to everything in this world, no matter how ordinary, if only we look for it.
But to love pickles, I guess.
What do you suggest?
If you're looking for something that's more akin to a kosher dill, we have our full sour. New pickles, which are just essentially salt and cucumbers.
Okay.
And we also have in between.
Let me get a half salad about.
Carolina finds her credit card.
So I actually have cash for once.
There you go.
There you go.
Have a wonderful day. Stay safe and enjoy.
You get a salad, what I was out, right?
Yep, that's good.